What's up? What's happening? What's going on? Welcome back to the Ground Up Faith podcast. This is the show where we have conversations with the peculiar people, places, and practices of Christianity. And this is a cross ministry program because today we're also doing our Discipleship Academy podcast, which is what we do for our confirmation students to teach them and have conversation with them about what's going on in the church. And we have a peculiar person with us today in Bishop Timothy Smith of the North Carolina Synod. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit the intro music here while my boss talks to me about why you shouldn't tell your boss that he's peculiar in mass media format. So anyways, let's roll that intro. All right, and this is fun. So those of you who are listening, you just heard the intro jingle, and for those of you who are watching the video version, you got to see that the bishop does in fact have moves. Bishop Tim, welcome.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be with you, Pastor Jonathan. This is a lot of fun already. I like the music.
There you go. There you go. All the things I'm learning during this COVID-19 pandemic thing, getting official intro jingle music for the podcast and having to pay for it, so you have all the rights and all that kind of stuff. They didn't teach me that in seminary. So anyways, just want to say welcome. We're very glad to have you here with us today. Why don't you just give us a super quick, like 30,000 foot rundown of who you are?
Okay. Well, probably the thing that tells the most about me is that is family. My wife is a retired middle school teacher, and we have 3 adult children, all of whom are married and live in North Carolina, and we have 4 grandchildren, and they're my joy. But I'm from North Carolina, born in Lenore, and then moved to Salisbury when I was in the 3rd grade. My parents were both public school educators, and I went to college in Chapel Hill. Was an NC State fan my whole life, but when somebody says, "Hey, we'll pay all your room and board and everything for 4 years," suddenly you say, "Go Heels," My grandfather was a Lutheran pastor, which is probably an important thing to know, because I didn't know him as that. I went fishing with him and worked in his garden, and he threw potatoes at me when I scratched something that I wasn't supposed to do or whatever. And so I just knew him as a guy. So there wasn't that holier than thou sort of thing about pastors. And had several people tell me through the years, including a Sunday school teacher early on, "Hey, anybody ever tell you you'd make a fine little preacher one day?" And I didn't want to do that. It wasn't part of the plan, but had some success in high school academically and athletically as well. I played football and basketball, and in our school, if you played on the football team, you had to run track because the football coach was the track coach. And that's where the real discerning began about possibly going to seminary. My dad was the Synod treasurer at that time, so unlike most people, I knew what a Synod was a little bit. Coach Smith was the coach, and Roy Williams was my JV coach at Carolina, and unpaid grad assistant. And after my freshman year, I tried to walk on to the varsity, and Coach Smith called me into his office and said, "You're not ever going to probably get in an ACC game, right?" I said, "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Kind of hurt, but I guess it was true, and I knew that because there were some good people there. I mean, by that time, James Worthy was was a freshman, and then a couple years after that, Michael Jordan was there as part of the team.
He was just okay at basketball.
There were good people there.
Yeah.
So I guess when you say, well, I didn't make that team, yeah, but I would have made any other team, right? But who can't make Michael Jordan's team? But a couple guys got hurt. And so my sophomore year, I got to practice with the varsity and dress out for home games. And Coach Smith then said, he said, what do you want to do, Tim? I mean, like vocationally. And I said, well, I'm going to med school. I was working hard, taking all the courses, all the sciences, and it's real competitive in a big school like that. Mm-hmm. And he said, you never thought of anything else? And I said, well, a lot of people told me I ought to be a pastor. And he said, you're a Lutheran, aren't you? I said, yes, sir, I am. Now, I didn't realize that Coach Smith's first wife was a Lutheran. And she had two brothers who were Lutheran pastors. And her father was a Lutheran pastor in Kansas.
Yeah.
And he pulled out a theology book right behind his desk, like you see Kermit the Frog behind me. And it was like a Lutheran theology book. And he had read it. And he said, you ought to think about that. And it was kind of an interesting logic in terms of call story. But he said, there are a whole bunch of people that are really good here in Chapel Hill who aren't going to get into med school. He said, you probably can. But there's probably a whole bunch of people. So that vocation, it seems to me, is going to be pretty well taken care of by capable people. He said, but as I look at the church, we need some real capable leaders in the life of the church. And you got to think about where you can make the most impact and the most difference. And so he said, if you hadn't completely discounted the idea, you might not forget about that possibility that you might go to seminary and make a big difference in the life of the church. And I thought it was really weird for this famous basketball coach to be talking to me about Lutheran theology and maybe going to seminary. I didn't know at the time that he taught Sunday school in his church and all that kind of stuff. That's not what you heard about him on the news, but that was part of my call story. I didn't drop all the chemistry and everything else I had to take, but it still took me a little while longer, and it's still a process. I still have days today, Jonathan, where I think, do I want to do this? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I making any difference at all, for God and for the gospel? But some days I think I make a little bit of a tiny, tiny little move in the needle with the Spirit's help.
I'm really glad to hear that, because it's good to hear the bishop say that you have days where you kind of wonder if this is what you're supposed to be doing.
Man,
I have those days too.
Right?
What's that?
Pandemic. Goodness sake. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a good a good thing to remember with calling, is it's oftentimes not the the clouds part and the sun shines down and it's all clear and you just go whistling off into eternity doing your calling thing, and it all makes sense from then on out. But there are definitely days where it's challenging and you wonder, is this what I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah. And when do you ever really know what you're supposed to be doing? I love what Frederick Buechner said. I think he was a Presbyterian pastor there. Calling is where your deep gladness and the world's deep need intersect.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are doing stuff that makes a difference, but they're maybe not very good at it, and they don't, or joyous about it. And a lot of people are doing things that meet the things that they love to do, but it's not really making a difference for anybody. Yeah. And both of those are frustrating. So anyway, I'm 61 years old, and reminds me of when Miss Maggie Tugman in Boone, she was the matriarch of the church, and I went to visit her, and I was really nervous because I knew she was, and she was clearly checking me out. And so I was nervously said, so Miss Maggie, I understand you've been a member of Grace Lutheran Church all your life. And she said, not yet. And so I don't reckon God's done quite with me yet either, even at 61.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to ask because I think some of the listeners and the kids in our Discipleship Academy class might find this interesting. I'm just going to circle back super quick because I know this story. When you were playing basketball at UNC, I think you had at least one interaction with Michael Jordan on the court.
Yeah, actually several. It's not like he calls me or anything, or probably even remembers me at this point, but I still practiced a good bit. Coach Smith allowed me to come practice with the varsity some, and so my senior year, Jordan was a freshman, and he was good, but he wasn't the best person on the team. I mean, James Worthy was no slouch, and he was from right there near where y'all are. He was from Gastonia, not too far from Belmont, and from Mount Holly, and all those other Lutherans that we got in that part of the world. So, in fact, he went to Ashbrook. Sleepy Floyd was at Hunter Huss at the same time. He started for Georgetown for 4 years. Good basketball, but yeah, I mean, I've stolen the basketball from Michael Jordan before, and I've pinned James Worthy's shot on the backboard. Blocked. Yeah. He didn't see me coming from behind, and so he just kind of put up this little dink thing, but let's just say that was extremely rare.
Yeah. Well, still, I think not many people can say that they've gone toe to toe with either of those two players and had at least a little something to brag about, as rare as it might be. So
I had them, I helped them earn millions of dollars and lots of fame, and they haven't given me a dime of that money.
That's a shame. We should, if they're listening to the podcast, because I know they sit around waiting to listen to the Ground Up Faith podcast. If they're listening, now's the opportunity.
Well, at this point, I don't care if they give it to me. They can give it to Good Shepherd and Mount Holly, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
Something for a little bit of money right there. So,
yeah.
So those were just some fun stories. I know you had told me those. And for those who are listening and don't know, the bishop and I have a little bit of history. You were my internship supervisor 12 years ago now, 12, almost 13 years ago now. Can you believe that?
Time flies. I remember helping y'all move in and helping y'all move out of that house back behind the church in Boone.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We still go up to Boone every once in a while and take the kids, and we have to do the tour of Boone, showing them all the places that Mommy and Daddy would go when we lived up there, and the house we lived in, and even at their young age, they do what kids do, and they roll their eyes.
And I remember thinking, when y'all gonna have some little babies? When y'all gonna have some little babies? Well, guess what? Y'all got little babies now.
You got little babies now. That's right.
In the pandemic, you've had little babies coming out your ears.
Yeah, I know. I think we're done because I'm still young. It's a lot harder to get up now with the last one than it was with the first one. You know how it is with the first kid. You think you hear them and you pop out of bed really fast to go get them. And by the time you get to the third one, you go, did we hear them cry? I don't know if we heard them cry or not. Let's let it go a little longer and see if it comes out. So yeah, so we have some history. So you wound up deciding to become a Lutheran pastor because of a conversation with your basketball coach, famed basketball coach there at UNC, and you married Wendy. And you got really lucky with her.
Oh my God. Yeah, I married up. That's for sure.
That's for sure. And so where'd you
But
go?
I'm not the only one, Jonathan.
Oh yeah, no, I married up too. I'm very lucky. All the bad luck we ever have, I tell April, is because I'm out of luck. I've used up all my luck in marrying her. So yeah, and actually, just another aside that's kind of helpful. The day we moved out of Boone, Wendy was there helping us move out as well, and she vacuumed and swept every inch of that house. Did a great job. And right before we left, moments before we hopped in the moving truck to move back to seminary for our last year, she pulled April aside and she told her, she said, one of your jobs is to remind Jonathan that he took his marriage vows before his ordination vows, and don't ever let him forget that.
Yes.
That is wonderful theology. That is true. That is excellent. And April reminds me of that on a regular basis.
Glad we could be of service.
So Saint Wendy is spoken of a great deal in our house.
Oh yeah, good.
So anyway, so you got married to Wendy, and so seminary. What does that look like? Where'd you go? How does that work? What'd you do? All that kind of stuff.
Well, it's a long story, and I've told enough people now, I don't mind telling it here, but I ended up going to the seminary at Gettysburg. But one of the big reasons I did is I applied to Southern Seminary, which is the one down here in Columbia, and they misplaced my application. And so I never got into Southern Seminary. And Gettysburg offered me a scholarship. So once again, kind of lived a charmed life, and I was able to do that. It turned out really nicely too, though, because there was an ulterior motive, and that is that Miss Wendy that you referenced earlier was from Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, on Interstate 95, south of Richmond, but just after you cross into North Carolina. And it was only about 3 hours and 15 minutes from Washington, D.C. And I did my midler year for Gettysburg Seminary in Washington, D.C. at the Lutheran House of Studies at Catholic University of America. Mm-hmm. And I was only 3.5 hours as opposed to about 6 hours away from Wendy. So it wasn't just the misplaced application. It was these sort of hopes that maybe there'd be a little more possibility of a future if I was a little closer by.
Absolutely. That was a good decision.
Seminary was great. It was hard. You know, it seemed like the first year there was just a lot of kind of tearing down some of our, and I love Sunday school. Sunday school is a good thing, but Sunday school theology probably won't get you real far in a pastoral role, at least. And so I felt like a lot of things that I had just assumed about life and about God, you know, got questioned and got, you know, they wanted to make us think. Mm-hmm. And we had some real tough professors at that time. And I almost, well, I did actually after my first year of seminary. I quit then because I'd get so sick, literally physically ill when it was my turn to preach in preaching class with Dr. Reidenauer, first year. And I just would get so sick, and I took that as God's indication to me that you're not cut out for this, buddy. And so I withdrew, and Bishop McDaniel saw me at Synod Assembly because my dad was a voting member at that time the following summer. And instead of patting me on the head like everybody else did and said, well, you know, the church needs faithful lay people, Bishop McDaniel sort of kicked my rear and said, who do you think you are? Is Tim Smith so almighty important he can't get out of the way long enough for the gospel to speak through him? And, you know, a lot of times you do need to be patted on the head, but every now and then you also need to be kicked a little bit in the rear. And I needed to be kicked in the rear at that point because I had sort of made this whole deal about my humility and I'm not good enough to be a preacher, so much so that I'd get sick beforehand. And Bishop McDaniel was right. I had made it about me. People were going to respond to me. How comfortable was I going to feel about doing this? Would people like the way I preached? Was I worthy to do this? I had made it about me. So had it not been for Bishop McDaniel yelling at me in front of my dad at Synod Assembly back in 1983, I wouldn't be a pastor. So there's a lot of people in our call stories, regardless of what we do for a living, right? There's a whole village of people who have been part of that.
Yeah, they nudge us and encourage us, and sometimes kick us in the rear.
Yeah, and you know the great discernment is knowing when to do that with folks, because you know you don't want to beat on people all the time. But I'm pretty much convinced that just patting people on the head all the time and telling them they're wonderful isn't always the most helpful thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Sometimes we're not wonderful.
That's right. Sometimes we're not.
So, you know,
we're not God, precious little lamb.
Yeah.
So you went to seminary in Gettysburg, and I think if I remember correctly, you did internship in Germany, right?
I did. Yeah, that was amazing. In Berlin, back when the wall was still up. This would have been 84 and 85. The wall came down in 89. Interestingly, we had a part in that movement without realizing that we did, because from our congregation, we were smuggling Western money into the East and dropping it off in Leipzig, which was highly illegal and could have gotten us landed in Siberia if the East Germans had caught us with that. But they knew we were doing it, but they could not catch us getting it across the border. And the reason they couldn't catch us is because we didn't have it.
Huh.
We had some American military people that will never, ever be named, even if they are no longer living, who were doing that for us and dropping it in pre-disclosed locations only to me. And then we would go get it after we crossed the border and then take it to Leipzig. And that was the group that eventually had to do with the taking down of the wall. We didn't have any children at that point. We were adventurous. We were stupid. We were invincible. It's called youth.
Well, yeah. But I did, even with our history, I didn't know that particular story.
Yeah. Oh man, that was awesome. And but you know, it was weird because on internship, it was largely American military and diplomatic community people in Berlin and West Berlin, of course, but it was surrounded by two walls. And East Berlin, and you had to go through East Berlin to get anywhere else, or East Germany. But we didn't do any hospital visits, didn't have any weddings, didn't have any funerals on my internship. So when I came back to my senior year of seminary, I went and worked 20 hours a week in a church to help with those things.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go to a congregation and not know how to do that.
I mean, so you went on an internship and you learned to smuggle money to take down the.
Well, that was sort of on the side, but yeah, that was sometimes there's more to people's story than you realize, right?
Yeah, I imagine that as our kids and listeners sit down to listen to this, hearing they're going to be learning from a bishop today, they probably didn't think that you have played basketball with some of the world's great basketball players and smuggled money to help take down the Soviet Union.
Take down the Iron Curtain. Yeah, well, we didn't even know that's what we were doing. We were just trying to help the East German church, because Western currency, there are a lot of things you couldn't buy with Eastern currency, like some of the technology stuff you're using on this podcast. And they had to have Western currency to do it, but you couldn't get Western currency in the East. And so that's what we were doing. You could get it, but if you got it in the East, they exchanged it at a rate of 1-to-1. But in the West, we could exchange the money at a rate of 4-to-1. I could get 4 East German marks for every one West German mark. So hard Western currency was worth a whole lot more, and that's why they needed it to do some things they couldn't get with East German marks.
Yeah. And so now looking back on it, it's that sounds like a glamorous thing and this big thing, but
like a spy movie, yeah,
spy movie stuff, yeah. But in the moment, you and Wendy were just doing very simple things.
Yeah. We also took to the Oberkirchenrat in Weimar. We took them lemons and cognac and bananas, things that you couldn't get in the Eastern Bloc. And that was not illegal, but that was just stuff that they didn't have. It wasn't a good situation over there. I just had a congregation this week tell me the ELCA is communist, and I'm like, I have lived within the context of a communist system. If I thought the ELCA was communist, I would have a major problem. I'm not a proponent. So that's a little bit of hyperbole and exaggeration. If you don't like everything that ELCA does, fine. They're not communists. We're not communists, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and listeners can take it from this guy here, because he's seen communism up close and personal. But that story just reminds me of a quote I use from Mother Teresa all the time. At least I think it's Mother Teresa. That's what I attribute it to. We can do no great things, only small things with great love.
Absolutely, yeah, that's Mother Teresa.
Yeah. And I use it all the time. And I think some of your story there is kind of a nice embodiment of what that quote looks like in reality.
Yeah, yeah. So, and that's the truth for just daily living. You know, these sounds like glamorous stories. Most of my life is just plain old get up, have my breakfast, go to work, you know, deal with the kids, do this. You know, it's not about glamour. It's about making just a tiny little difference where you can and letting go of the stuff you can't.
Yeah.
Because there's so much swirling around us that seems out of our control, right? Especially right now.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think I'm not going to just drop quotes the entire time, but I think is it Augustine that prayed at nighttime, Lord, I've done what I can. I hand the church back to you, and I've done all I can, or something to that effect.
That was St. Augustine. Yeah. St. Augustine's daily uh, evening prayer. And, you know, the church, it simplified, it said, the church is yours, Lord. I'm going to bed. Which that's a good one to remember too. That we don't have to do everything. We don't have to be the savior. We already have that one. That job's taken.
That's right. Yeah. So good. You did internship. You've served, I believe, 4 congregations, or three.
Well, three under call. I worked a lot in that congregation in Hanover, Pennsylvania, my senior year in seminary, just because I felt like I needed to, and the interim pastor there was happy to let me do a lot of things, and maybe not a highly motivated individual. And So I worked pretty hard there, but I was under call at St. Paul's in Startown, which is Hickory. So if y'all, you know, I guess you'd hop on 321 to get there. I don't know how you'd go to Startown or Hickory or whatever. But I really loved that place and had our children there, and missed those dear folks from my first call. And then I went to Boone for 16 and a half years, and that's where Pastor Jonathan and I's paths crossed, because we supervised a bunch of interns.
I was one of the Tim turns. We're actually trying to get a newsletter together and maybe create a band or something like that.
Now, they still have interns up there. That's just part of what that congregation does. And they even had a real stalwart of the church die and leave some money to endow having interns there forever, making it a teaching parish. And that's a really great thing to do. It's help prepare seminarians, and you get some good ones and you get some not so good ones for your context and everything. Don't ask me what Jonathan was, right? He's a good one. And
I had my moments.
yeah, don't we all?
But yeah, and so then after Boone, you went to Atlanta.
Yeah, I went to Wendy that you mentioned earlier. You said that was my midlife crisis. I was 50 years old, and our youngest, Ruth, had just gone off to school at Chapel Hill, and, you know, empty nest syndrome. And I'd been there for a long time, and I thought, well, gosh, if I wait too much longer, I'll be too old if I ever want to go get another call. And I went to Atlanta thinking I would be there for 12 to 15 years. And then I would move back to retire in North Carolina. Really amazing ministry in that congregation. They've been through some bumpy times, but it was a very wealthy congregation, a very large congregation, not by downtown Atlanta standards, because we only had about 3,000 members. And Stanley's church had been across the street, you know, with like 14,000 members, First Baptist, but they moved out into the suburbs. But some, you know, a lot of the churches had over 10,000 members, but we had 3,000, and that was a lot. 54 employees, but just a lot of meaningful ministries. We had built in 1970, and we're still operating Lutheran Towers, which was a low-income senior citizens housing facility for 247 seniors whose average income was $11,000 a year total. Fed 300 people lunch every day in the food ministry. They're still doing that. Started a boys ranch, which was kind of a group home for young men that got kicked out of the foster program. They had a lot of great ministries and a lot of amazing people, and worship was just outstanding there, which was the big thing, because I've always been a bit of a worship snob, very kind of traditional. I don't have all the bling that Pastor Jonathan has, but certainly I just appreciate more high church type liturgy and worship and so forth. And worship was just stellar. The worship space was very traditional Gothic, just stellar. So we had some good ministry there, and I was serving there when I got elected quite unexpectedly to be bishop in North Carolina, because it does happen sometimes, but rarely does one get elected bishop in a synod where one is not already there. Now, granted, I'd been in North Carolina for 24 years prior to that, but it's like a call process in 36 hours.
Yeah.
Essentially, when you get the phone call, they're like, do you want to leave your name on the ballot? Because you were on the nominating ballot. And I'm like, so what does that mean? They're like, well, now's your only chance to take it out. So basically you're saying that it's Friday morning and on Saturday afternoon, we'll know who the bishop is, but I'm agreeing right now that if elected, I will serve.
Yeah.
And they said, yep, that's right. And it's a call process that happens on TV, or at least live streamed, so that all your former parishioners who are at that time, your current parishioners, are texting you saying, what are you doing? What the hell are you thinking? Get off that stage. Yeah. Quit playing around, you know? So that was surreal. That was really hard and weird. And
go back to that phone call that you got on Friday morning. What's the moment of that phone call like? And you kind of have to give an answer.
Well, it wasn't that weird because I had a few people call me on my cell from North Carolina and say, hey, I'm gonna put your name on the nominating ballot. But just so people know what that's like, it's a blank sheet of paper, and you just have to put any pastor in the ELCA, and they're like 11,000 some. And I said, oh, well, great. Somebody told me somebody was going to put my name down, but how many people names were put down? And they said, strangely, exactly 100. So there were 100 people on the nominating ballot. And I said, well, I don't think I'm going to do that. And the person said, well, everybody else who's present here saw all the numbers for each person flash up on the screen, but you didn't see this. And I wasn't watching it online. They said, there's one person with 111 votes, and it's not you. I say, okay. And then they said, but then the next person has 91 votes, and that is you. And I was like, oh, so like, this isn't just a formality here. There's a slight chance that this could happen. Now it was weird. It wasn't weird to begin with, but now it was weird because I just covered up the receiver and I said, Wendy, 91 people put me on the nominating ballot. And of course, Wendy, with all of our children sort of coming back to North Carolina, our oldest son had just become a pastor in North Carolina the previous December, and this was May or June. And Wendy's parents, my parents, who are starting to get pretty old and feeble, she said, oh, so there's a chance we could go back to North Carolina? She wasn't thinking about my being the bishop. She didn't care about that. She said, leave it in. And I did. And we got in the car and drove.
Yeah.
And that's sort of how that happened.
Cool. Thanks for that story. I didn't know the other side of the phone call, so to speak. That's kind of neat to hear.
And I got home at 1 o'clock in the morning on Sunday morning, following that election, home meaning back to Atlanta, and showed up in my church And if looks could kill, boy, I got a lot of those looks that day. A few people were, what was really funny is, I didn't know at the time, but a lot of people were saying, well, congratulations on your promotion. And it's like, it's pretty severe cut in salary, you know. So you don't generally think about that with promotion, but I understood what they meant. And but most people were just like, felt like I had really betrayed them. And I guess I understand that, because I mean, my plan had been to stay till I was about 62 and then retire, which, by the way, will be in 10 months.
Yeah.
If I'd been in Atlanta, I'd be retired in 10 months. I might be retired in a few months, because there's another bishop election coming up. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah.
But one doesn't run for re-election in the ELCA. It's a blank slate every time, and that's the way it ought to be. The church just says, let's reconsider the whole deal. Start with the blank sheet of paper.
Yeah.
And we take it from there.
Yeah.
And Pastor Schnibbin could be on that ballot.
There are a lot better choices than Pastor Schnibbin on that ballot, I can assure you.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something interesting that I've experienced as well. It's a really awkward thing, whether you're a pastor or a bishop or whatever it is that you're doing, kind of serving in the church, serving in a place and then considering another call. To me, it's always felt a little bit like cheating.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, like I say, I'm cheating in front of everybody.
Yeah. So I've not had to cheat in front of everybody like that, but it feels like cheating, because here you're serving a place and you love the people that you're serving, the people in the place and what you're doing there. But you're considering what God is kind of putting before you, and it's a very awkward, uncomfortable kind of feeling.
Oh, it is, because you love those people dearly, you know, and it becomes a matter of, sort of back to Coach Smith, where you feel like you can make the most, difference. And you know, I think I even told you at one point, and the people at St. Paul's in Dallas quite justifiably were mad at me about it, you know. Because I told them, you know, we'll get you a good pastor. You know, Good Shepherd is a unique situation right now, and there aren't many people that A, can do that, we believe, well, and B, are willing to do that. So, you know, I remember having that conversation with you, and it's really hard, because you love those people and you don't want to abandon them. And even from a theological point of view, that's really hard, because we say as Lutherans that the call of the congregation is the call of the Holy Spirit. But there's that moment, sort of in that in-between liminal time, when you've got the call to St. Paul's in Dallas and the call to Good Shepherd in Mount Holly. And you've got to decide, will the real Holy Spirit please stand up? You know, remember that show, To Tell the Truth? No, you don't. You're way too young.
I'm thinking of Eminem and his song "Will a Real Slim Shady Please Stand Up." So
okay. See, a whole point of reference thing.
But the fun thing is, for our confirmation kids, you and I are both going to be old on that, because they don't even know who Eminem is anymore, I don't think.
Oh yeah, well, confirmation students, I'm ancient.
I'm old too, so.
Right. So, but in my mind, I'm only about 16.
Well, that's about where we stop, right? Is 16.
And in my sense of humor, the whole Synod staff will tell you that I'm about 8.
I've experienced that, and I think that is probably accurate.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're talking about calling and the uncomfortable reality around calling and what that's like. And this might be kind of a good pivot point. So you wound up being called to be the bishop. You've been doing this for the past 6 years. And one of the things Kai and I talk about here a lot at Good Shepherd is language, how we use it, insider versus outsider language. So what's a bishop? Because a lot of people may have heard that term. They might make some assumptions about what that is. They might have no clue other than hearing it, or have never heard it before either. What are you?
Yeah, right. And it's different in different traditions, and they have different roles and responsibilities. So, the Greek word is episkopos, which means overseer, but we translate it also as bishop, but one who oversees something, and like the Episcopal Church. Yeah. They use that word, and in the Episcopal Church, the bishop has maybe a whole different kind of authority than we do as Lutherans. For us, it's an elected thing. It's not for a lifetime. It's not some special or extra grace as it is in the Roman Catholic or Episcopal tradition that somehow this apostolic succession is passed on to you. Though for the sake of ecumenical agreements, especially with Episcopalians, we're willing to enter into that ritual so that we can do what's essential for them and share ministry.
And so just so people are aware, and Bishop, you can correct me, but my understanding of because they might not know what Episcopal succession is or historic succession is.
Yes, it goes all the way back to St. Peter.
It's literally the idea that St. Peter laid his hands on the next bishop, and that practice continued on down to effectively you.
And that changes not just the function of that person upon whom hands are laid, but changes the being of that person. The philosophical or theological word would be ontological, a change of being. And what it would mean would be extra grace, so that, like, we don't do this generally as Lutherans, and I certainly don't do it, but in many traditions, you would kiss the bishop's ring because the bishop, when the bishop is present, the church is present. A cathedral is where the bishop's chair is. And so, again, we Lutherans are not that way. We're much more functional. And so we're elected, and it's a 6-year term. You can be elected again, but you also may not be elected again or choose not to. And when you retire, you're a pastor, you're not a bishop. It's not a lifelong or indelible mark of any kind. And we basically oversee the life of the church together, and the things, the parts of, and in our case, we call it a synod, S-Y-N-O-D, which is a weird word. Synodos is 2 Greek words. You didn't know this was going to be a Greek lesson, did you, Pastor Jonathan?
Whenever we pull up Greek, it's going to be a word.
But you can do a little bit of that Greek already, because y'all know S-Y-N means together or same, like synthetic or synonym or syntax. That's what that means. And odos, that word also. You don't, or a word that derived from it, like that gadget on the dash of your car that tells you how far you went. You know what that's called? An odometer. So synodometer is together traveling, going together. And so it's not some fancy institutional concept really, but just the description of what it means. Like if we were to say, well, there's Tim and there's Wendy, and there's Matthew, there's Isaac, there's Ruth, but then there's family. And what does it mean to be family rather than all those individuals? Synod and congregations are the same way. There's Good Shepherd in Mount Holly, there's St. Paul in Startown, there's Holy Comforter in Belmont, there's St. Paul's in Dallas, there's, Holy Family way up in the mountains in Highlands, there's, Good Shepherd Elizabeth City way on the other end of the state. But together as ELCA Lutherans, we share a lot of things and do a lot of things that we couldn't do by ourselves. And so really, what we call the bishop used to be called the synod president. Mm-hmm. So it's more of a kind of a bureaucratic thing as well as a pastoral thing. The bishop is the pastor of the synod. A lot of people introduce me as the pastor of pastors. Not entirely accurate. What the Constitution says is I'm the pastor of the synod, and the synod is made up primarily of congregations. Mm-hmm. You didn't know this if you're listening from Good Shepherd, but I'm one of your pastors because you're in the synod and I'm the pastor of the synod. And we do things for pastors, but we do most of what we do for congregations, and we hope that congregations and pastors together are working along together. Sometimes they're not. Mm-hmm. And sometimes what we do is conflict intervention, but that's just life. you can't have people together without conflict. You just hope it's addressable. But a lot of the stuff like call process, when you need a new pastor and training your call committee and helping you through that process, or redevelopment, is something that a Good Shepherd's been going through, or, just a lot of the agencies and institutions that have spun off of and are still affiliated with the North Carolina Synod, like Lenore University, started by the North Carolina Synod, Luther Ridge, Luther Rock, Camp Agape, Curie Beach, all started by the North Carolina Synod and its predecessor bodies. Lutheran Services Carolinas, with all of its adoption agencies and refugee resettlement and nursing homes, and it's just incredible social service agency stuff. That's stuff that's amazing. Many of those ministries are way bigger than the North Carolina Synod on a corporate level, but they started with us together as a couple hundred congregations who said, we can do this together, but we can't do it by ourselves. There are just so many things that, and again, somebody really needs to be overseeing that, and that's what a bishop is. And there's a whole office here in Salisbury. Salisbury is where the Synod office is, because that's where, probably very similar to a lot of our congregations. Why are they where they are? Because somebody donated that piece of land. And that's where it was in Salisbury, right here on Interstate 85. And so we travel to congregations to do all those things we were talking about, and more. Start new congregations, help sort of broker and mediate conversations when maybe two small congregations can't quite make it by themselves, like you've got not so far from you all with Philadelphia Lutheran and Holy Communion Lutheran up in Dallas. And they couldn't, either one, quite afford a pastor, but they just didn't want supply pastors and different people coming and going. So they decided together they'll share a pastor. Well, we were very involved in that process. So we try to help our congregations be as strong as they can possibly be. And I'm rambling here, Jonathan, I know, but when I went, my very first year, I went to this little congregation, rural, and I said, well, who can tell me what a synod is? And this woman said, oh, I know, it's like a union for pastors. And I said, I can see why you might think that sometimes, because we do advocate for pastors and make salary guidelines and, all this stuff. But primarily, we're a union for congregations. And our two big emphases really are whole, vital congregations, whole and healthy leaders. Because you really have to have both. Mm-hmm. You got to have a good leader in order to be a vital congregation. But you got to have a congregation willing to take some risk and make some sacrifices and be invested, or else even our best leader isn't going to be able to help lead that congregation very far. Yeah. So it's both and if it's not both and there's conflict between the two, which of course it happens, then we also step in and try to help with those conflicts.
Yeah. So in the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, we have synods, of which there are 66.
There's 65 synods.
Yeah, 65 synods, each with a bishop and a synod office, that sort of thing.
And Bishop Eaton is the 66th bishop.
She's the 66th, and she's the presiding bishop.
That's right. She's the grand poobah. No, we don't call it that. Please, that's not what it is. But Bishop Eaton is the presiding bishop. So she's essentially the head of the ELCA, also elected every 6 years.
Yeah, and she's in her second term.
She is in her second term.
And when she was first elected, she had 4 emphases or what it meant to be an ELCA Lutheran, and I've put myself on the spot now. I should have made notes beforehand, but we're church together, we're Lutheran, and we're church for the sake of the world.
Those are the ones, yes. Yeah, those were her first term, those were her big emphasis points. And then this second term, the big emphasis points are vital congregations and whole and healthy leaders. We don't have those things. And when we say vital, so what does that mean? It means life-giving. It means communities of Jesus that are involved. And so it could be a campus ministry. It doesn't just have to be a congregation, but communities of Jesus that are involved in life-giving relationships with God, with one another, and with their community. I mean, that congregations have to be nurturing that relationship with God. They also have to be nurturing those relationships with each other. And they also have to be somehow nurturing those relationships in the community if they're going to be what we call vital congregations. Those three things are critical.
Yeah, so here at Good Shepherd, we sort of use the 3DM model a little bit.
Yeah, up, in, and out.
Up, in, and out. And it's sort of lovingly been labeled the Dorito here. So sometimes we ask people how your Dorito is doing, which always makes me hungry.
Doritos, but they give you bad breath.
They do give you bad breath. But with the mask these days, that kind of helps a little bit.
Yeah, and it's worth it even without. Yeah. Unless you're going on a date.
There you go. That's right. So anyways, Bishop, I want to be mindful of your time. I know that you are busy, and this sounds like a line from The Godfather, which is, again, I think, dating both of us.
Yes.
Very busy, but I've kind of got three wrap-up questions. I kind of want to ask here, and you can take, since you're the bishop, you can take as much or as little time as you want. So the first is just totally wide open. As the bishop, and you've got a congregation here in Mount Holly listening, some confirmation students, and my vast network of listeners on the Ground Up Faith podcast show. What would you like to share? What's that?
I can't even imagine.
Neither can I. So what would you like to share with us? Whatever you want, from your perspective, what would you like to share with us?
You know, this is very much time sensitive because, and when we're doing this conversation is March 16th. But right now, if you give me a wide open free pass to say whatever I want to share, and given some of the conversation and narrative in our country right now, I simply want to say, please get vaccinated. Please get vaccinated for yourself, for your family, for everyone. I think one of the things that we miss is the opportunity and maybe the priority of thinking of the common good. I have been vaccinated. We as the North Carolina Synod just passed a resolution encouraging all of our congregations and pastors, just this past weekend, to really lift up for the sake of love of neighbor, just like wearing masks, that we really get vaccinated. And I understand there are folks who are not into that because of some fear or political persuasion or statement. But for our part, out of love of neighbor, we want to urge you to do that.
Thanks for sharing that. And I know your son and your daughter-in-law are both physicians, so they've been frontline folks.
Correct. And our other son had COVID for the last month. Got it from his 4-year-old son who went to daycare, and the whole class got it from the teacher.
Yeah.
And then the kids none of them got sick, but they brought it home to their parents. And so this stuff is still wicked out there. This was just in the past. I mean, they're still under quarantine right now, and Pastor Jonathan knows what that's like.
I do. I've been
place to be with little kids.
Difficult, and I'll say just to back you up on that, Bishop, as if you need backing up. My sister-in-law is a pharmacist and is the head of pharmacy at a hospital system outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And she has been, since the vaccine has been out, she has been running vaccine clinics. And let me tell you, they're all superheroes because she gets up very early in the morning and comes home very late at night and does that 6 days a week. And she's got my niece, her daughter, 3 years old, and she's away from her daughter, not getting to see her, but she's doing that out of love for community.
Absolutely, yes. So That's what I wanted to share with that free pass, was just that plea, very time sensitive.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. Next question. You have had a wealth of experience across the church. I know you have traveled internationally in your role as both a pastor and a bishop. You've been in Germany being a smuggler, as we've jokingly said, and had a wealth of experience across this state as well. Um, so, what have you learned about the church over the course of your years, from your unique perspective?
Yeah, and that's a big one, and there's lots of things I could say, but I'm going to choose to go with that. Everywhere I've been, from Papua New Guinea to East Germany, back when that existed, to Africa, to all over this synod, people are very, very different in their traditions and customs and politics and all kinds of things, but people are also so very much alike and in need of the essence of what we as the church have, and that is the gospel of Jesus. There's all kinds of programmatic and peripheral things that maybe are even necessary on some level, certainly important, but that the gospel is compelling, and that's our lifeblood, and that's what the church is proclaiming throughout the world and is changing lives everywhere. And that's our hope of moving forward, not only by ourselves, but together. If we want to focus on all of our differences, and that's not going to go well, because there are plenty. It's kind of like going on a date and saying, "What's your favorite color?" Blue. Up. Wrong. We have to be open to one another with our different ways of being the church, but not compromise the gospel of Jesus. So that's not a new and profound thing. That's what the reformers and everybody in between, when the church has been in peril, has come back to, is the basic stuff. The gospel of Jesus Christ, incarnate, lived, crucified, died, risen for the life of the world. That's what we got, folks. If you let go of anything, don't ever let go of that.
Thank you for that. So last one, I'll give you a little context for this one. Obviously over the past year in this COVID-19 reality, I get a lot of people, from my grandmother to all kinds of other people, that ask me if the church is going to survive. Even before this whole COVID-19 pandemic, I would get that question from time to time. Sometimes they mean it more narrowly in the specific congregation or big picture. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but again, from your perspective, what does the future of the church, and you can define that however you want, but what does the future of the church look like from where you sit?
Yeah, we just had a wonderful Conference of Bishops shortened Zoom meeting, like everything's Zoom these days, about 10 days ago. And the Conference of Bishops talked about this a lot, trying to predict what it will be like. And first of all, yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, but it's pretty clear that the church will be and is going to need to be a hybrid church. I think there's a lot that we can learn from this pandemic. I know there's some things as our synod that we had not been doing before that we will keep doing once the pandemic is gone, because we've realized, gosh, this really helps people. This really makes a lot of difference. It also means that there were some things that we were stuck in before, but we didn't realize we were stuck in them, that we probably won't do anymore. So when I say a hybrid church moving forward, I think that, what we've been able to figure out about reaching people online isn't going to go away. And I think some people are going to gravitate to that, and some people who would never darken your door in person are probably willing to and are accessing your online worship and presence. So it's going to be hard, because it's going to be hard on clergy, especially if they don't have a lot of lay support with things like technology and everything, because because as it opens back up, I think clergy are going to be expected to go visit all those homebound that you haven't been with in person for a long time and make up for all these things and do these things with the youth and do these things with, I mean, everything's going to come back in as an urgency. Oh, and by the way, while you're just really killing it trying to do all that, you have to do all the stuff that we did during the pandemic too, to reach all these other people. So we're going to have to be gentle with one another, not just during the pandemic, but coming out of it. And I think, again, there's so many unknowns, but I think that we're looking at maybe a hybrid way of being church. And I think that some of that's going to be really life-giving, because there are a ton of things that we can do online that would save a lot of people a lot of time and money, rather than everybody traveling and everybody coming and everybody doing this. You could have it may be that you decide, just as a for instance, that in the future, your council meetings are going to be once a quarter in person and the rest of the time on Zoom. Yeah. Now, that's not so compelling in the local congregation, but on a synod level, it is. Why would we have people travel from Wilmington and Asheville to come to Salisbury quite so often when we can access those people in meaningful ways? Now, that doesn't mean don't ever get together in person. So I think we're going to be in a really, really big and challenging both and church. That's what it's going to look like.
I appreciate hearing that. And just to quickly share with you a story that actually sort of inspired this podcast that I'm doing. Was having conversation with a young mother in my congregation who they're just not able to participate much in the life of the congregation because not just in the pandemic time, but even beforehand, because we set everything up to be in person. And when you're wrangling little kids, that's very difficult to do. And I asked her a question. I said, when do you have time for you, for your own self-care, for growth, for development, to even practice faith? And she thought for a second and she said, every night I sit outside of my kids' room for 30 minutes while they go to sleep because they're scared. And if I sit there, they're not so scared. She said, that 30 minutes, and when I stare at the glowing screen on my phone, that's my time. And I said, what do you do? She said, I scroll Instagram, I scroll Facebook, I look at YouTube, and I listen to podcasts.
Wow. See, that's amazing. And, it's sort of the same conversation, but just in a different time than, when we used to have all these meetings at the church when we had little kids, and, we'd ask all these people to participate, and they're like, do you have childcare? And we'd say, well, no. Well, I can't come, but yeah, I mean, we've got to be sensitive to those things. It's not out of the question to think that, some nursing home in Gastonia or Charlotte, or I don't know if you have nursing homes in Mount Holly, might decide that once a month, what they're going to provide as worship for their folks is the broadcast from Good Shepherd in Mount Holly. I mean, or prison, there's just all kinds of ways that this could be opening up a world of people that we can't reach.
Yeah. So it's an exciting time for sure.
Yeah. So I think it's a hopeful time. I'm really more worried about the sort of political and ideological divisions than I am about the pandemic, as serious and threatening as the pandemic is, because I think if we will get vaccinated, we can knock the pandemic down. It's going to take a lot more time to rebuild trust and relationships with all the ideological stresses and strains, politically, racially, otherwise, that we've got going on. And those are going to be a big part of what future church looks like too, including the conversation where everybody is at the table, because everybody seems to want to come from the extremes right now, and we Lutherans have always been the middle people. Sinner, saint, justice, mercy, law, gospel, not either or, both and. So when I say we got to be a both and church, it's not just about the technology after the pandemic. It means we got to be a both and church that includes everybody. And if I think I'm an inclusive person, then I have to be very intentional about including the people that I think are not inclusive.
That's a good word.
So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate this conversation. Again, I want to be aware of your time because I know that you hop from Zoom to Zoom. So we thank you for giving us. I think you've given us a little over an hour here. So that's a true gift on our part. And we really, really appreciate that. So I'm gonna play us out here, so to speak. Turn off the recording, and then Bishop, I'll say bye to you on Zoom, and we can go about our way. So, anyways,
thanks so much. God bless you all.
thank you, and everyone, thanks for listening, and we will check with you later.